Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Fusion. My name is Taryn, and I'm one of the pastors here, and we are excited to worship together today. Go ahead and take a posture of worship that suits you best. Feel free to stand or sit, however you feel like worshiping today. And if you're worshiping at home with us, same goes for you. Take a posture of worship that works best for you in your space. So please join us as we worship.
Sin and penalty. At the cross you took my place, with your grace on top of grace. Lord, how you love me, I don't deserve. Grace on top of grace. More than I've asked for, more than I'm worth. Grace on top of grace. Hallelujah, I am free from my sin and penalty. At the cross you took my place, with your grace on top of grace. The sound once lost, now found. Heaven came down, and grace rescued me. How sweet the sound once lost, now found. Heaven came down, grace rescued me. Hallelujah, I am free from my sin and penalty. At the cross you took my place, with your grace on top of grace. Hallelujah, I am free from my sin and penalty. At the cross you took my place, with your grace on top of grace. With your grace on top of grace. With your grace on top of grace. With your grace on top of grace.
You guys can go ahead and take a seat for a second. This morning, I just wanted to share a few announcements with you all. The first is that if you have not yet downloaded our app, now is a great time to do so. You can text the words Mitchell Fusion Space app to the number 77977, and then follow the prompts from there to download it. All of our announcements are in there, and what I really want you to do right now is to check in with us for the morning. So take a moment to open up that app, check in with us. There should also be a link on the Facebook stream. Just let us know that you've joined us this morning. You can also submit prayer requests, any other things you'd like us to know in there as well. So this is our way to stay connected with you in this season. So please take a moment to do that if you have not already done so yet this morning. Just a few other announcements. If you are new here, we encourage you to check out our Connect desk after the service. We would love to get to know you and give you a free gift. And something that we do is every person who joins us for the first time at Fusion, we donate to a local community nonprofit in your honor. So let us know that you've joined us. We are super glad to have you here this morning. As we continue through our Lenten series, many of you are probably working on your Lent kits. We have just 2 of them left at the back table if you are interested in getting one of those. And if you don't want to take a kit, you can still access all the information on our website and participate with us as it works for you. So we hope that it's a way to practice some spiritual disciplines in this season, and we are just excited for the chance to dig in a new way over Lent. We will have more information in the coming weeks about Holy Week and Easter Sunday as we know more, so stay tuned for that as well. But feel free to stand and sing with us as we continue in worship this morning.
Surround me with a song of deliverance from my enemies.
You guys can go ahead and take a seat. And I just invite you into a moment of prayer this morning. Today I'm going to share a prayer from this book of liturgies called Every Holy Moment, and I hope that it will be meaningful this morning. So would you bow your heads and pray with me? Take a moment and just in the silence, share your hopes, your plans, your concerns, and your prayers for the week to come with the Lord. Oh God, we are gathered today in worship, in grateful fellowship, to share in the blessing of this time together. We lift to you here our hearts and our prayers. For grace and provision in this coming week, we look to you. For the life-giving gifts of your word and your truth, we are thankful. For the joys of life shared with family and friends, we praise you. For the grace to live in grateful humility, we look to you. For the many small blessings and beauties that surround us, we are thankful. And for the displays of your majesty and power in our world, we praise you. For the promise of your constant presence, giving hope and comfort and strength, and the joy in various moments, and the labors of the week to come, we bless your holy name. May the rhythms of our petitions and thanksgivings become, in time, like the steady drumbeat in a long and unending song of your faithfulness. We center our hearts on you this morning. Amen. At this time, I'm going to dismiss the kids for Children's Church. You can go ahead and go just to Wagner Chapel across the hall there, and Pastor Rebecca and Pastor Joel are leading you this morning. Rebecca looks like she is ready to go. She is jumping and cheering. We are ready. So feel free to take your kids out there if this is your first time here and you're wanting to check that out. And I am going to turn it over to Jordan to share the word this morning.
Awesome. Thank you, Taryn. Well, good morning, Fusion. How are we doing today? Good. That was actually a really good response. It's so different to be able to say something and actually have people here to be able to respond to it. So it's such a nice change to have you all back in the space with us. We are kicking off the second week of our Lent series today. We're doing a series called More Than, where we're taking a look at 7 spiritual practices. There we go. 7 spiritual practices, and kind of instead of quitting things for Lent, as we often do, we're saying, what if we actually took that time that we're supposed to create with the fasting and actually invested in things to help move our spiritual growth forward? So last week, if you were with us or watched online, Pastor Steve talked about prayer and kind of the significance of prayer and how we move from this attitude of prayer to this movement of prayerfulness where everything we do becomes about prayer, right? How do we integrate this practice more into our life? And this week we're talking about presence. And just so you know, to give you a little perspective, we took 5 of these themes from one of the membership vows for the United Methodist Church. And so if you become a member of Fusion, if you go through the baptism process or transfer your membership from another church, or just come join us and decide, I want to be part of this church, there are these vows that we all partake in to say, yes, we are part of this broader community called the United Methodists, and these are some of the things that we care about and are passionate about. And so there's 5 things in one of the vows, and this is going to be the test for me to see if I can remember this, if I have to go to Taryn for help on this. But it's prayers, presence, gifts, service, and witness. I'm getting the thumbs up from Taryn, so I get the gold star today. And so these are things that, as United Methodists, as part of this broader movement of what Jesus is doing in the world, we commit to do. And then we've added in 2 more because there are 7 weeks, and there are 7 days in the week. And so we added in this idea of Sabbath and this idea of worship. And so we're going to take some time and just look intentionally at these parts of our spiritual journey. And so I drew presents. And this is an interesting one for me. I'm just going to put everything on the table here. That when I went back to look at this passage that I picked for this series when I was planning it out a little while back, I looked at the passage and I was like, what was I thinking? Have you ever had one of these moments, right, where you're in a moment and you're doing work, and maybe you write something down on like a scrap piece of paper, and you come back to it like a month later, and you cannot for the life of you figure out what you were thinking? Earlier this week, I had one of these moments with this passage. So I'm going to throw it on the screen. We're going to read it quick, and let's see if we can figure out what I was thinking together. Cool? All right. So all of these passages are coming from a very famous sermon that Jesus spoke in Matthew called the Sermon on the Mount. So there's these 3 chapters in Matthew that make up this really famous teaching of Jesus where we draw a lot of our inspiration from. So the Beatitudes are one of the big pieces of Jesus' teaching that you may be familiar with, the whole blessed are thing that he kind of goes through. There's this long kind of interplay between you have heard it said, where he's referencing the Jewish laws, but I say to you, and he's kind of revisioning and reorienting them, right? This comes from a later teaching where he's talking about vows, ironically. Maybe that's what I was thinking. But it says this. Again, you have heard it said to those who lived long ago, don't make a false solemn pledge. But you should follow through on what you have pledged to the Lord. But I say to you that you must not pledge at all. You must not pledge by heaven because it's God's throne. You must not pledge by earth because it's God's footstool. You must not pledge by Jerusalem because it's the city of the great king. You must not pledge by your head because you can't turn one hair white or black. Let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. So on a surface level, maybe you're with me right now. You're sitting there going, okay, I don't know what this passage has to say about presence at all. Anyone there? But I think I figured it out. I think I remembered where I was going with this. This last line of, let your yes be yes and let your no be no. This past year has been hard. Are you with me? Someone is. We've got one person who thought this was a hard year. I don't know how the rest of you are doing, but maybe you're just too shelled to even respond right now. But yes, this past year has been challenging. We have been forced into situations we never anticipated and never wanted. But I would suggest that in this pandemic season, as we've been forced to be isolated, as we've been forced to have distance, as we've been forced to engage in practices like masks that we may not want, that it has been a revealing process of some of the areas in our lives that we had overlooked previously. I know in China, when they first started coming out of their super lockdown, they saw divorce rates skyrocket. And I'm guessing in the United States, when we look back, out of this pandemic season, we are going to see divorce rates skyrocket. Because all of a sudden, we find ourselves in this place where we need to spend time with someone who at one point we really loved and wanted to spend time with, but somewhere along the line, maybe we got a little distant. Maybe we started talking to our phones more than we started talking to our loved ones. And all of a sudden, we are together in this intense season with no buffer. I wonder if this idea of your word being enough without pledges applies to this concept. I wonder if we as a culture have forgotten how to be present to each other because our words that we lived were not always the same as the words we spoke. Have you been there? Have you been in a place where you hear yourself saying something and you wonder to yourself, do I actually believe that? Friends, I wonder if so many of the challenges that the church is facing today, that we in Christian community are facing today, is a result of our words that we say not lining up with the words that we live. And specifically, I wonder if we've forgotten what it is to be people together. I wonder how often we relied on that shared physical space. and said, yes, we are present to each other when we were checked out, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. I wonder how frequently we've found ourselves in that place where you're sitting with someone who you know on an intellectual level you love and care about, and there's a disconnect. So today I want to ask you, what if all these things we said about Jesus, what if we actually believed them? What if we actually believed that God loved us so much that he sent his son to step out of heaven into this messy, broken, incomplete world? What if we believed, like that last song said, we are no longer slaves to our fears? That we have a God who walks before us, before we even get there. What if we believed that God loved us just as we are, and not as we want to be, or should be, or ought to be, or what someone else thinks we should be? Friends, I think that would produce radical transformation. I think if we actually believed these things, we would be able to take this idea of grace, a grace that rescues us, and integrate it into our lives. Because I have this theory that on a foundational level, when we talk about presence, what we're talking about is grace lived out. That when we are present to others, it is an extension of the grace of God in our life and in their lives. When we are present to our church community, when we do more than just show up, it is an extension of grace. It is taking that grace that God has shown us and extending it to those in our community. When we look at the world around us, be that Mitchell, be that Platt, be that Kimball, wherever we are, when we are present to our community, when we see the needs in our world and lean into them, we're extending the grace of God to those around us. And when we are present to ourselves, truly present to ourselves, we stop beating ourselves up. We stop challenging us on the things that we think others need us to be. We stop blaming ourselves for whatever it is. We extend grace to ourselves. We talk about being a grace community as the church. We talk about being a place where everyone is welcome, where we're not going to judge you, and we're all here to grow together. Friends, what if we actually believed that? This week, I was sitting in chapel, which, by the way, if you need something to do Thursday mornings, come check out chapel here. Eric and the student ministries team and Denise do a fantastic job. So Taryn and I were sitting here in chapel, and I was thinking about the first time I was in this room. So I've been at Fusion almost a year, coming up like right on a year, like tomorrow. But I remember back to the first time I was in this room. And I think it was the spring of 2013. Anybody remember 2013? Seems like a lifetime ago, right? And this author came to Dakota Wesleyan named Bob Goff. Anybody familiar with Bob Goff? If you're not familiar with Bob Goff, here's your homework for this week. Pick up a copy of Love Does. It was Bob's first book, and read it. Although presence is not in the title, this is a book about what it means to be fully present in your life. And I was thinking back to I was sitting right about there. There were these rows. And how I wouldn't have believed 7, 8 years later that I would be here instead. It's so funny how God works sometimes. But if we're not present to the promptings of God in our lives, we might miss it. And for some of you, you might be planners, right? Like my wife is a planner. She has lists upon lists upon lists. And I am not, right? You guys know people like this, people who are super detailed. When you say, I'm going to go to the store, they have a detailed list, not only of what you need, but which aisle it's in at various stores. That's not me, right? But sometimes when we need to have this planning, we miss out on the presence. And Bob talks about this in his book. He says you don't need to plan, you just need to be present. Sometimes our planning gets in the way of what God is trying to do. I think in the pandemic, this has been true. Before we can do anything, we have to have all the right answers. And this is not a bad thing in theory, right? Like, we want to do what we can to keep people safe. We want to do what we can to minimize the spread of this virus. We want to get through this as fast as possible. But in that process, I wonder if our plans got in the way of our presence. Now, let me be clear. You can be present to people when you're not in the same room with them. My best friend lives in Denver, Colorado. And we text, I don't know, once a month or so. But I know that if I call this friend, he will drop everything if I need him. We haven't shared a physical space for a couple years. But there's no question in my mind that Lee is present in my life. So let's not get it confused. Presence doesn't always mean sharing space with someone. Presence can be a random out-of-the-blue text. Checking in. How you doing? Presence can be scheduling a Zoom call. And I know we've all got Zoom fatigue, so I hear you on that. But it can be a Zoom coffee. Hanging out, connecting, knowing someone on a deeper level. There's a Jewish philosopher named Martin Buber who talked about this idea of an I-it versus an I-thou. And what Buber suggests is that there are two primary types of relationships that we have. We have I-it relationships, which are foundationally transactional. That means that I am in relationship with you because I need something from you. Or I'm in a relationship with you because I need to get something from you. Now, let's be clear. These are not necessarily bad relationships. Some of them can turn toxic. But there are times when relationships are I-it relationships, and that's okay. I have people in my life who I love dearly, who when I see their name on my caller ID, I know they need something from me. Do you have these people in your lives? And then there are other people, like my friend Lee, who the relationship itself is enough. I hope you have these relationships in your life too. These are the I-thou relationships, where it isn't about me fundamentally getting something from you. It's about us being together and being present. Does this make sense? These two types of relationships. I would argue that we practice presence when we engage in those I-thou relationships. And that starts with us. I hope as you walk through this week, as you look at your relationships, you can find both the I-it relationships, which we need, but also those I-thou relationships where you can be known and truly know someone else. Because this is at the core of what presence truly is. When my presence with you isn't about changing you or getting something from you, it is about us being together. And here's where this gets really tricky. Because I think God wants us to have an I-thou relationship with God. And if I'm completely honest, the American church has missed this. That we focus so heavily on heaven, this transactional, I am in a relationship with God so that I get into heaven someday when I die, that we miss the beauty of the I-thou relationship with God. We're being in God's presence. We're spending time in an attitude of prayerfulness, like Steve talked about last week, is enough. I'm going to say something that might get me in trouble here, but I'm going to say it anyway. If you are only at church today to get out of hell someday, you may not be here for the right reasons. Because there is so much more beauty and connectedness and goodness that can happen when we actually get to know each other and love each other for who we are, not because we are hiding and running from some eternal torment. Like, yes, I believe that at the end of my life, I am going to spend eternity in the presence of God. But if I'm only focused there, I miss an opportunity to see God all around me, in the faces of you, in the faces of my kids, in the faces of the person who's checking out my groceries at the store. Friends, as we talk about presence, would you consider resisting the urge to look solely towards the someday with an M, not Sunday? You can look towards Sundays. Would you resist the urge to focus solely on the future and take time this week to think about what would it look like to be present to my friends, to my family, to my children, to my spouse, to my coworkers, to my faith family this week? Would you consider what it might look like to build relationships that are not selfish, but that are selfless? Would you consider what it might look like for you in this season where we have unique challenges to be present? My sister's a teacher in St. Paul, and she is super creative, and I'm super jealous of it sometimes. But one of the things we've started doing is, as she was teaching online, she found all these games that you can play virtually across the miles with each other. And we're all on our phones answering questions and playing this game together. On one hand, we live in a day where technology has made our lives increasingly disconnected. I can have 1,000 friends on Facebook and not know any of them. We can live under this guise that we actually are in community when we're not. And we live in a day where technology has made it easier than ever for us to stay connected, for us to practice presence with each other. But you have to choose it. It doesn't just happen. So as you get these presence eggs in the Lent Challenge, I'd invite you to be intentional about it, to choose it, to not resist because it's hard or uncomfortable or it pushes you beyond your comfort zones. Because here's what I know to be true. When we take those steps of faith, when we choose community, when we choose each other, we grow. And this is the whole point. To grow together, to grow in love of God, to grow in love of ourselves, and to grow in love of the world. As I invite the band up, I just want to say quickly that if this is an area you struggle with, you're not alone. I think for me, I'll just put myself here on this. There are reasons for it. I have some neurodiversity issues with some attention deficit disorder stuff. But being present with whoever is right in front of me is not easy. Or even more challenging, sometimes being present for me doesn't look like what others receive as being present. So we need to find ways to know ourselves and know others enough to be able to speak presence in a way that is true for us and is well received by others. So this is a process. Being present to each other is not something that we're just going to click into overnight. It's going to take some work. And we're going to mess up along the way. So don't let that stop you. My buddy Lee that I mentioned earlier, we have been trying to connect via FaceTime or Skype or Zoom for like 2 months. And I've got young kids, and he's got a 1-year-old, and we're both working full-time jobs, and he's started a business, and we haven't been able to connect. Is that unfortunate? Yeah. Would I love to be able to spend time with this person who is so life-giving for me? Absolutely. But there's something about even trying, engaging in the practice, having those misses that builds relationship. This may seem counterintuitive, but even when we fail, simply trying to be present to people will be received as being present to people. So wherever you're at, would you start this week? Would you start being in relationship? Would you start investing in the lives of those who are important to you? And would you not be afraid to mess up? And when we mess up, can we make a little promise here? Let's extend each other grace. Because we're all trying to figure this thing out. Would you pray with me? God, would you help us believe in action the things we say we believe in our words? Would you help us not need some external pressure to do what we are being called to do? Would our relationship with you and our relationship with those around us be enough to have places where we are known and where we can truly know others? God, we know vulnerability is scary. We know letting ourselves be truly seen when we're not putting up a front is hard. And we also know without those moments, we can never truly be known. So would you help us be courageous? Would you help us be bold? Would you help us see those in our spheres of influence who could use a little dose of our presence and of your presence? God, don't let our planning get in the way of our presence. Help us live out grace in action this week. We thank you and we love you. Amen. If you consider Fusion your home, this is the time where we take some tithes and offerings. We're going to be talking about gifts next week. And one of the Trefs is speaking. I'm not sure exactly which one, so that'll be a fun surprise. But practicing these gifts, this giving out of our abundance, giving out of our blessing, is a spiritual practice. So if you consider Fusion your home, we would invite you to engage in the practice of generosity, whatever that looks like for you. Because we know when we give of ourselves, that God will multiply it. And friends, God has multiplied your gifts this past year. You have been faithful, and Fusion has been able to be faithful and present to our community because of it. It's your gifts that make the Lent Challenge Kids happen. And that is the way that we can be present in our community. It's your gifts that help with the ministry that's happening at the Abbott House, where we are being present to people who need a little dose of God's love. So we're going to sing a song. You can give online. There are baskets in the back. We'd invite you to be part of what God is doing here at Fusion. Would you stand and sing with us?
Evolving in pursuit of what you said. watch the one behind.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here today at Fusion, whether you were in person or online. Next week, as Jordan mentioned, we're going to be talking about how we worship with our gifts. So we encourage you to tune in next week or join us in person as we talk about that. If you are in person, if you could hold tight in your seats for a moment, some people are going to be passing out some disinfectant wipes so that we can get the space ready for the next crew. But may you go this week practicing presence in both your relationships with each other and in your relationship with God. So go in peace and have a great day.